Hey everyone, and welcome back to PDA Dad UK. This episode, I am going to be interviewing the fantastic Roanna Brewer, who is an actually autistic advocate and is dealing with the SEND bill that's going through Parliament at the moment and has had a lot of insight into that. So we're going to be interviewing her. As I say, welcome back to PDA Dad UK. Before we go on, go hit like, hit subscribe, ring the bell. You'll always know when I've got new content coming up, and you'll be helping me to hit that 10,000 subscriber mark I so desperately want to get to. As I said before, we are interviewing Roanna Brewer.
Thank you for having me, Duncan.
You're very welcome. I'm really appreciative of it. And it's wonderful. We've had a long conversation already, and we realised we probably had to get going to start.
Yeah, we've probably covered it already, haven't we now?
Pretty much, yeah. So
yeah.
This is just revision for us now. Obviously, in the UK at the moment, there is a lot going on politically, and we're seeing a lot of stuff that's really affecting the disabled community as a whole, but I really see it affecting the neurodivergent community. And it's things like the cost of living crisis, the energy bills, all the things that help us get through life and help, for my daughter getting to meet, therapy sessions and all that kind of stuff. It's so important that she's able to get to that, but it all costs more and more money. But there is a bill going through Parliament. Do you want to explain what exactly is going on at the moment? Actually, before we do that, can you tell us a bit about yourself and why you are, an authoritarian on this field?
Wow, I don't know if I am, but yes, I am actually. You're completely right. You're completely right. No, well, a few years ago, I got involved with a group called Send National Crisis, and we sent a petition to Downing Street. So we went to Downing Street to present it. And at that juncture, we were protesting over the state of special education needs in the UK. And that was before a pandemic and a living crisis. And since then, it's become increasingly untenable. And the backdrop now is that we've had the SEND review, and following the SEND review, we are looking at the schools bill. And the schools bill, generally, what that's going to represent for ND kids is the greater powers that are going to be afforded to local authorities to essentially force them into school, issuing school attendance orders of up to £2,500 to levy on parents, and including an imprisonment if needed be. As you know, Duncan, a lot of children with ND conditions.
Just to explain quickly, for anyone watching who's not familiar, we use terms like ND and NT. It's neurodivergent and neurotypical. And so people like myself, where I'm not autistic, I'm not ADHD, traditionally called neurotypical. For people who may be autistic, ADHD, sensory processing disorder, basically anything that shifts that life perspective a little bit is generally called neurodivergent. Just so you know what we're talking about when we say ND, NT. Please go on.
Yeah, sorry. Sometimes it's easy to slip into jargon.
It's easy, and because we live in it.
And I'm really guilty of it. But a lot of them present what is now termed emotionally based school avoidance. Essentially, these schools are being driven towards academy models which are run like businesses. And these businesses are presented with targets, attendance targets, which are quite ridiculous, I think, when you apply it to SEND. No SEND child with any ND conditions that I know can make school 100% of the time. It's unrealistic.
Certainly not in mainstream.
Certainly not in mainstream. I mean, let's be honest. We're talking about what is not fit for, I don't think, for the standard child, let alone any other conditions within that. It's not, you've got 36 children in a class, that we've already taken away the teaching assistant. So we've got one teacher, 36 kids, maybe within that 10% might have ADHD, autism, sensory processing. They need support. They're not receiving support, and they're essentially in fear. They might be isolated. They may even be restrained. And of course, they develop a fear or a phobia of school, because that's what it is. It used to be called school-based avoidance, but this is a fear. This is a phobic panic disorder that many kids will develop because their needs aren't being met, forcing them into.
And it's not a safe place, is it? It's not a place.
Not a safe place.
So for so many, I mean, my understandings of how autistic people can feel in those situations, meltdowns and all that kind of stuff generally occur when a person doesn't feel safe. It raises the anxiety, And so it spills over into meltdowns, shutdowns, could be challenging behaviors, whatever it is. But it's there for a reason. And so you get this state of mind that develops that I'm just not going.
And I don't blame them. I
No,
don't blame them.
yeah, exactly. You can understand it. It's like, why would you want to put yourself, if you were in a job you hated that much and was causing you that much emotional distress, you quit and you go and find something else.
It wouldn't happen. When I was working at the local authority, there was an OT who went round to make sure we were comfortable at our desks. I don't remember seeing an OT within the school setting for either of my children ever. And, you know, I've now since fought 6 tribunals, 7 pending, as we said, you know, JR, to secure a safe learning environment for them, because this isn't a safe learning environment. As you've already said, you're absolutely correct. And that best practice and that research is out there. You know, you only have to look at what Studio 3 are doing with the low arousal approach. Nowhere in the low arousal approach does it say fine parent, imprison parent, increased powers to a local authority that already don't behave lawfully. Because if they did, 95% of the tribunals in my county wouldn't be won by parents. They're not supporting these kids. You know, children with an autism diagnosis should not have to fight to just have their needs assessed.
And it is a fight. I mean, this is something that I've talked about so many times on this channel, and it's something that just comes through. For my daughter, it took us 8 years to get from the point of referral to actually having a diagnosis, and that was 8 years of fighting and pushing. It's hell on parents and carers. It's even more hell on the kids. And it's an interesting part of the discussion that we were having before we started recording was that I'm a proponent for diagnosis, and not because I think people should be labeled and boxed, but I think once you understand something, if you can understand why something's occurring, it helps you to be more supportive. That's been my experience. So from that perspective, I'm a proponent for being diagnosed. I don't think everyone needs to be. My wife hasn't been officially diagnosed, but she knows, and it's that kind of stuff. But you know, when we've got these kids going through these processes, and it's just so hard to get through.
And their body has gone into fear. They have already absorbed that trauma in their body. The minute that building is there, it started. The build has started. The anxiety.
We've spoken about polyvagal theory on this channel, and
yes, brilliant.
It's one of those things that has answered so many questions. Once I started looking at that and understanding polyvagal theory, it just makes so much sense.
Oh, it does,
because that trauma just lives with us. And you know, people who, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder is really just a perfect example of really what that polyvagal system is doing when you've got trauma, which informs your reality in the present.
Absolutely. And you know, you've crippled that child before that child has had a chance to blossom.
Yeah.
You know, these are the years, the formative years, where they should be supported. They shouldn't be. I think if you've ever had to hit a point with that child where, you know, they are having to be pinned down or dragged, it's over. You know, they're sick now. You have to remove them from that environment and take the stress down and calm the nervous system. It's going nowhere. But, you know, I stood there as an autistic and thought, this is utterly bizarre, because not everyone has the power to home ed. So you might have orders from the family court saying you must keep your children in school. So you might have no control in this situation. And, you know, they're trying to bribe the child back into the building with something like a bloody guinea pig. I mean, you can play with the school guinea pig. I don't mean to be funny, but we haven't got past that awful smell, the school bell, the uniform that itches, the entire classroom is just, I couldn't learn in that. There is just touch all over the walls. And if you've got ADHD, there is no way you could focus on it. I'm sorry, my dog.
That's okay, don't worry.
My dog.
But no, what you say there is so interesting, because it's something that I've discussed before as well, is that schools are a sensory overload environment in general. I mean, for my son, it's really interesting because obviously I've got a neurodivergent daughter and a neurotypical son. And her classrooms are so toned down. Right, she's in a special educational needs school, and her classrooms are really toned down so that it's not this sensory. So for my son, it's they're bright pictures up and all that kind of stuff. It works for him. He fits really well and neatly into mainstream. He's got a good group of friends and he's learning and he's enjoying what he's doing. So it's really good. I'm not trying to knock mainstream schooling for the majority of people, but
Mm.
that doesn't mean that we isolate that 10, 15, 20% of the population that have different needs. We talk about
And
this,
it's different strokes for different folks.
that's it.
And we're talking about equality, we're talking about inclusion. That means not leaving out anyone. But I just don't think that this is possible within one homogenized academy proposal that government have in mind, where you get fined if you haven't got an attendance of 97%. I mean, there's one bit, and I think it's section 436C, which allows them greater access to your information and your data and any other information as prescribed. It doesn't even have to be related to the child's education. I think the whole principle, there is a civil liberty issue here.
That really
The whole
is.
principle to the home ed community as well is a huge thing because of these SAOs, that they can force these children back into schools. And let's be honest, I think the last thing I read, they said up to 50% of home educated kids were neurodiverse. And that is only because they were failed in the first place. So you'd think they'd be happy saving the money, but no.
You think that, wouldn't you? But that it's I find this with so much government stuff and all that kind of, it's so what looks good on paper.
Absolutely.
And we are back on the Grumpy Gits. We spoke about Catherine Singh, who's the UK strictest head, and her approach is just. But what worries me, I mean, if we were to have another Conservative government, she's going to be brought in as the education minister.
Don't.
And that terrifies me because it is just so rigid and so inflexible.
It's so backward, and it's so at odds with current research that's coming out of universities about the best way to support children. It's at odds. And why is it at odds? Because it's about this. Yet the law says the child has to be at the heart of the process. So at what point do we get some accountability from this government? At what point do we, but this is it, they're beyond it. I don't believe that under current law you could really take anyone for damages, unless within a judicial review remit. And the whole thing is complex, but they're allowed to fail these children, unlawfully. They certainly failed mine. I'm lucky that we were in the end able to access Sendist and get something for them and be able to actually escape that life. Where I was accused of making up the kids' conditions at one point.
Well, this is something I've discussed so many times, and you get this whole pattern of parent blame. And
that's what underpins the school bill for me, is this whole assumption that if a child is not within mainstream under this parameter, that they are somehow a missing child, I think they called it, that they somehow are only fulfilled through that. No, that's incorrect, actually. That model damages our kids. It damages PDA kids.
It does. It's PDA especially, because PDA is...
Can you imagine it?
Well, so if anyone doesn't understand PDA, I'll put links to descriptions of the traits and what PDA is like. But realistically, living with PDA for a PDA is, if you can imagine just any demand creating an anxiety that means that it's kind of crippling, or it leads to a meltdown, violence, aggression, all that kind of stuff in kids, particularly because they're not able to process in the mature way. And school is just a list of demands. From the second you get there, you've got time demands, you've got what you've got to learn today, what lessons you've got. There's no flexibility to allow any kind of change in that. Very fortunate for my daughter, we got her into a SEND school, and they have a brilliant way of doing things, and they do a lot of different things. There still has to be some rigidity and some routine, because I don't think any school can, even homeschooling, can't function without some kind of a timetable that works. But if she's struggling, there's options there to take her out of the classroom, and there's small classes, and they can give her a break. They can monitor that side of things, and it makes such a huge difference. There isn't the capacity for that when you've got 36 kids in a class. You don't have the option there to, take them out and do something different. But what it means is that we're putting these demands, and if you can think of the most stressful thing you've experienced, and imagine having to live that 6.5 hours, 7 hours a day, what damage that's going to do. That's why so many PDAs will struggle down the track with things like PTSD and stuff like that, because they're simply reliving a trauma that's been belted into them for the last 10 years of their life.
And it's so short-sighted because, you know, they're reluctant to spend, let's be honest, on neurodiverse conditions in education, completely reluctant to assess it, completely reluctant to support it. It is, their culture is starting to change. I mean, they're failing teachers. They're not letting teachers, you know, they're restricted by these conditions as well. It's frustrating for them. However, the cost to society in the long run of not supporting that way. I mean, I was talking to someone who works at HMP Lewis, and just the sheer volume of what they considered undiagnosed inmates, what cost to society is there, you know, through drug rehabilitation, through the trauma that they sustain. And the government now, I believe they are going to, I think, release 4 billion in the year ending 2023 in education. So there is some cash there, let's be honest. It's just a case of where the hell they want to spend it. And the drive seems to be the academy model, which for me is a business model and will never accommodate our children. So it's, you know, where special education needs was already at the edge prior to all of this stuff. We've now got the hammer that's going to hit us on the head, because those special schools, you know, there aren't many of them that do get it, that can, you know, and it is, you have to fight tooth and nail for it.
Oh, you do. I mean,
you know, you really do. And some parents just don't have the skills to do that. They don't have the resources. They're not in the economic conditions where they can, you know, afford that. And it's tragic, really, because their kids are going to be, and those families are the ones that are going to be subject to this scrutiny out of the school bill. But and so horribly let down if you haven't got a diagnosis either to support those needs, because you've been on a waiting list for years.
Yeah, exactly. But it's
so
also
let's find them
2,500. Yeah, of course, because everyone's got that.
The Tory approach to it is just quite incredible. I mean, I do recognise that in some ways the school bill, you know, it's a massive bill. It's not just these areas that we've talked about, but, you know, many other areas which I simply don't understand, but I understand are necessary. But it's too much of a bedrock assumption that children who aren't in mainstream school are somehow failing in life, or that their parents are failing, or that their parenting is failing. You know, that's the assumption that we need to challenge.
That is, and it's a stigma. It's actually not the, you know, talk to any teachers. Generally, teachers understand that. No, Sen, education has its. If this is something that comes from an outer perspective, that somehow we still have that 80s perspective of what a special school is, and it's all the, you know, back when it was labeled as being spastic or something. You know, and you have this perception of it being very extreme disabilities that, you know, and they're all up to, and it's just like, oh, we just put them somewhere so that they can, you know, and it's just so inaccurate and so wrong. But it's also so short-sighted that we have this perspective, because most of the amazing advances we've made as a human race have been from neurodivergent people, like, you know, Einstein, Tesla, you know, even today you've got the likes of, you know, Elon Musk, you know, it takes that shift in perspective to push us forward, because if everyone follows the same, very neat, cut into a very simple box, then you don't get that person that's on the outside going looking, but, you know, why can't we climb that mountain? What's stopping us? Well, physically you can't, there's nowhere up there, but you know, like, it takes those people who just think beyond the limitations of what we're given.
Yes. And it strikes me that, you know, I had hoped that, you know, my experience of education to some degree, I was quite privileged. You know, I went to private school. And so therefore my parents paid for it. And there were certain accommodations I had because of it. I didn't have to sit in a class of 36 where, you know, yes, it was tough in other ways, and it still traumatized me. And I think that actually what traumatized me was my sense of failure, because I just screwed everything up and I couldn't learn the same way. And, you know, I always thought I was really stupid. and that informs your self-worth. You make poor life choices, yada yada. Something that struck me about autistics and these varying sort of presentations is that when you look at any child that has been abused or is subject to severe distress, they do also repeat the same patterns of behavior. They may flap their hands, they may rock. A lot of autistics are just very traumatized, you know. And that's the real problem for them in life, and they have to bear that going forward. So hey, let's just make it a bit easier on them when they're kids.
And stop that process that puts them into a position where they have to go, but where it is traumatic. I mean, I think school's a traumatic experience for most. So certainly, I mean, I was very traumatized through my school experience because I was really, really bullied. I know you wouldn't believe it looking at me now. I'm such a confident and
it's weird that
an interesting guy, but you know, but no, I really was a target for bullying, and that lasted with my whole school life, and I
struggled to stay with you.
And, you know, even into my 30s, I remember getting nightmares, still reliving some of those bullying experiences, and that's just that trauma that carries on. And that's just, you know, that's I didn't have the the pressures that the neurodivergent members of society will go through.
Duck. I remember there was this friendship bench at his primary school, and of course he had no friends and blah blah, and it was extremely difficult for him. He went on to a special school and that didn't work out, but you know, and we can always sit on the friendship bench. And I think, do these people not understand that friendship bench is where you get punched? You know,
exactly. Go and sit on the friendship bench. That's just like, and put this sign on saying loser. And while you're at it, you know, can you get down to your underwear just so that everyone can laugh at you a bit harder?
Why don't we just stick a little post-it on their forehead and say that it's there?
I'll just let's get it tattooed. Like, you know, the whole thing. You need to live with
like it. When I had kick me on my back.
Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah, I see you, mate. I see a school down the road I went to go and look at recently, and they had painted, like, it's a busy secondary mainstream school. Now, I do have SEND. What am I meaning? If I was a kid that age, going to where they were supposed to go, these kids were SEND, and they had written down the front, the whole of the door, special educational needs. I just thought, you just don't get it, do you?
Well, it's interesting because this, I mean, it's another conversation to have, but you get this. I referred before to the fact that, you know, it used to be called the Spastic Centre. It's just in Australia, the Spastic Centre. And then the word spastic rightly became a very offensive word. And so then you had retarded was a label that was put there. And then that became a very offensive word, and rightly so. And you've got these things, and it's because we keep putting these things, it's the stigma that gets attached to it that becomes then offensive. And so I think we're going to see a point 10, 15 years down the track where SEND will be something that, can't believe people used to say that, but actually it's just we keep trying to move to a nicer way to represent this. But when you have, like you say, like when you have special educational needs.
I just thought, oh my God. Right. So I'm supposed to go there when she's stressed out. Like, who wants to be the one to walk through that door?
Well, there's an Australian comedian called Steady Eddie, who is a disabled comedian. And he used to talk about that. And actually one of his things was he used to talk about the fact that, you know, he was put in this special ed school and all this kind of stuff. And he used to get drummed into him all the time. You're just the same as everybody else, you know.
Yeah. But you're on that.
And you take me to school in a bus that says Spastic Centre written down by really big letters. It's like,
what are you on? They've already got anxiety. Because we're PDA, we wanted to get a black permanent marker and write normal needs on the toilet door next to it. That's where it was, by the toilet door. You know, there's a sense of still very much separation within these environments, I think, is the point that I mean to make, is that, you know, for inclusion to really happen, it needs to be part of the fabric of it. And I'm not sure it's possible, to be honest. I've yet to see a really happy autistic.
Well, it's a conversation we've had on the Grumpy Gits a number of times. And it's this thing of it has to start in education, which is this just teaching kids the value of acceptance and inclusion. and start teaching kids that just because someone's different doesn't, we've tackled it in so many ways. We've tackled it with sexuality, we've tackled it with racism. I'm not saying those things are perfect. There's a long way
but
to go
it's
with
the
both.
same thing.
But it's in people's minds, and we're in a far more accepting society than we were previously, and that's a brilliant. That's happened within my lifetime, seeing those changes.
It's been amazing for me. I mean, I was just a very cross mother, and I popped up on Twitter and met the likes of you and amazing people, made amazing contacts, and just in that, what has it been, maybe 13 years, just in that period, I've seen such a change. Because actually I've got two, and obviously age difference meant that we went through processes for both of them at different times, and you could sense a sea change. But as you say, when we were asking for women's rights, it took a process.
Exactly that, and you wouldn't dream.
Disability,
It.
And it's taking back the narrative. But this is what programs like yours do: is they take back the narrative.
That's what I hope. I want that to be. I sometimes feel bad because obviously as I speak as a neurotypical, but it's why I find it so important to engage with neurodivergent.
Well, we've had this conversation, and it's not a world where we're exclusively one or the other, and it needs to be a collaborative society, and that can only happen when we discuss
together.
That's it.
That's just it, and I think it's so important, and it's a world that I've said it before. I liken it to Hogwarts because you don't realize it exists until you need it, almost.
Yeah.
And then you, like you say, you hit Twitter and you found all these. It's exactly the same sort of thing that happened to me. I started my Facebook group and I got on Twitter and started to meet people.
Yeah, now
this community exists, and it's just like going through that wall at the to Hogwarts. It's wow, this whole world exists.
It was like that for me in Send. I just sort of went, and then wow, some of the people I've met, I could have never dreamt to meet, and I'm so pleased to call them my friends. And, I've had so much help, along the way from the community. Actually, it's the community that get you through.
You know what? That's bang on. And it's exactly
always other people and the goodness of other people and the information that we share.
Absolutely. And it gets out there that way. So I want to bring it back to this whole, the schools bill that's going through. Parents, carers are going to be obviously concerned hearing about that side of it. And what I think is really good is you drew the fact that it's not all bad. There's a lot to do with this that is very positive.
There's
this element in here. And it's this thing that happens too often where you get something insidious that's wrapped up in a bubble of, bubble wrap and fluffy puppies and it goes through and they get this stuff through.
That's right.
And it's this, if parents are concerned, what can they do to make their voice heard? Carers, parents, anybody.
I think if we can just keep feeding back. So if you can contact your MPs, just register your concerns over, if you're in home ed, how that may impact you. But make sure, you make it personal to you. Write to your MP, follow Square Peg and Not Fine in School and Send National Crisis. That's me.
They're all on Facebook, by the way.
They're all on Facebook, also on Twitter, but Square Peg and Not Fine in School have got a massive campaign going at the moment. We're fully in support of. It's called the 3 Asks. There are 3 areas that they are asking the government to look at in the light of the schools bill, and that is to look at a mental health absence code, which would be a huge bonus to us because, as we've discussed, so much of this is tied up in mental health. If we could have greater flexibility over that to support our ND kids who are struggling to be in school. Also to put an end to truancy laws, which we just, at the moment, when you look at Send and you look at the bigger picture, this isn't really, we need to move away from this whole narrative of truancy and bad parenting. It's about unmet needs, actually.
Yeah.
If those needs aren't met, I don't see how turning it into a money-making exercise by fining them is going to benefit the child if the child's supposed to be at the centre of the process. And also to introduce an attendance code of practice, because so much of the time when children are absent from school, it's not someone who might have a good understanding of neurodivergent conditions that might be authorising this absence. So we need greater awareness within the framework of an attendance code of practice.
Yeah.
So that we know that, you know, when we do look at these issues within fining, you know, let's be honest, it's not going to be a wholesale fining of everybody, but I think that there is, you know, it can be county specific. I don't know, county to county can be very different with approaches. So for my county, it was a concern. I spent, you know, 6 years trying to get my kids in school, and they weren't fine in school. They're not in school now, they're in AOTIS, which is education other than at school, which is actually being directly threatened here, because the premise is that unless your child's in mainstream, 100% of the time, they can't be doing well, and they surely can't be educated, and they must be, therefore, vulnerable. That needs to change. You know, it's the subtext. But I think with greater understanding and a code of practice and a mental health absence code, these things will help, you know, in the long run, safeguard those children from any incorrect policy or procedure.
Absolutely. We will put links to those groups in the description on this video. We'll also put information about how you can approach people like Sendias.
Yes,
and stuff like that, because they can provide great support, and they can also point you in the right directions. Citizens Advice Bureau are very good at being able to direct you in different ways as well. So please do go check those out if you need to follow those links.
Yes, I would also say IPSIA are a brilliant resource for special educational needs. They've got a lot of template letters. So if you do have any problems, get supported by IPSIA. See if you can get in contact with SOSN. Eleanor there is an absolute star, but there are good people out there. Square Peg are doing amazing stuff with this campaign. So and they're very vocal on Twitter, and they're engaging. So let's see what happens.
Absolutely. We will put links to all of that in the description, so you can go and follow up and follow through. If you've got concerns, express them to your MPs. Do what you can, because this is a direct threat to the well-being of our kids, and those kids who just have different educational needs to the majority of people. And that doesn't mean they should be excluded or removed from a situation or forced into a situation where they can't function. Roanna, I want to thank you so much for joining me. This has been so interesting.
It was a good laugh. I've really enjoyed meeting you properly on here, because I've been following you for ages on Twitter. But it's great to speak to you, you know.
Likewise, it's so good, and it's always enjoy these conversations. So we will definitely be speaking to Roanna again, because I get the feeling there's a lot of things that we can link through, and expertise that she can bring to what we do. So
thank you so much.
Please do go hit like, hit subscribe, ring the bell. You'll know when there's new content coming up. I will say good night to you, good day, whatever you're doing. We will see you again on the next episode. But in the meantime, please do stay safe.